Here are 10 incredible facts and stories about the legendary plane of the US Army Air Force, the B-17 Flying Fortress. The B-17 was famous for being very tough to shoot down, but could it still fly when practically cut in two? Well, almost. During a bombing mission of German seaports in Tunisia on February 1943, the B-17F All-American collided with a German Bf-109. The wing of the German fighter cut diagonally through the plane, almost leaving it without the entire tail section. Despite having the fuselage nearly cut in half, the plane miraculously managed to return to base. The plane was repaired and even used again in missions. In 1944, after completing a combat mission over Hamburg, a formation of B-17s was returning to England when German fighters attacked. In the ensuing chaos, a B-17G, the Little Skipper, collided and became hooked with another B-17, the Nine Lives. The two planes flew together with the upper part of the Nine Lives fuselage being stuck together with the lower part of the Little Skipper's fuselage. Both American pilots in surrounding planes and German soldiers on the ground witnessed the incredible sight before the two conjoined B-17s crashed into German-controlled territory. Incredibly, a total of 10 crew members survived from both planes. On November 23, 1944, an almost brand new B-17G was hit by a flak gun while on a bombing mission in Germany. The crew urgently needed to reach friendly territory. However, the crew members decided to jump out of the plane and were rescued by Allied forces. On the other hand, the plane with autopilot turned on made a crash landing in a field in Belgium and damaged its wing and propellers in the process. At the time, it was very unlikely that the aircraft could make a perfect landing because the autopilot system was not yet sophisticated. Although many people did report that it had made a perfect landing, that seems unlikely. After examining the damaged aircraft, a British officer, John Crisp, concluded it was not a German trap, but a plane that landed without anyone on board. What amazed the British was that a dozen parachutes were found on the plane, along with jackets and half-eaten chocolate bars. Everything looked like the crew had just vanished. But at the time, extra parachutes were put in bombers, as they were often damaged during combat, so the crew had bailed out successfully. A B-17E named Old 666 due to its last three numbers on its tail was one of the most heavily armed bombers of the Second World War. After initial service, it was declared unworthy, but Captain J. Zemer Jr. and his crewmen had better plans for it. Instead of letting it rot or be used for spares, they modified the plane into a real beast. They equipped it with 19 machine guns and reinforced different parts of the fuselage and cockpit to make the plane strong enough to fly, even when heavily damaged. With these modifications, the plane could fire in all directions. The effectiveness of the modified B-17 was best seen during a solo mission, mapping the Bougainville Island in the Pacific. After they spotted the enemy, the Japanese scrambled around 20 A6M0 fighters and attacked the Old 666, unaware of the fierce resistance they would soon face. During the air battle, both sides suffered large losses, after which the Old 666 was in terrible shape. According to the US Army sources, the Old 666 managed to shoot down 5 enemy fighters. Although the aircraft managed to land in Papua New Guinea, 6 of the crew members were lost due to injuries sustained on that day. Captain Zemer himself was initially proclaimed dead, but managed to survive and live a long life. As for the Old 666, it was scrapped in New Mexico in August 1945. In Operation Aphrodite, around 25 B-17s rammed full of explosives were redesigned to be used with radio guidance. Pilots would fly the B-17s and then bail out before the plane hit the target. The abandoned planes would then be controlled by the crew of a nearby plane. The design proved to be unsuccessful, and the drones didn't inflict much damage to enemy targets. The B-17 was even used from Soviet airfields for bombing German targets. B-17s took off from 3 Soviet airfields on operations to attack eastern parts of Germany, Hungary, Romania, and occupied Poland. The operation, however, had limited success. The main issue was that the Soviets were not particularly motivated to cooperate with the American operations on their airfields. Several B-17s were captured by Germans and were used by the Luftwaffe's elite squadron KG-200 for various missions, as well as for training the pilots and for examining the aircraft. Japanese forces also captured 3 B-17s and painted them with Japanese insignia. They used the captured B-17s to develop effective tactics against US bombing raids on Japanese targets. Alan McGee, a gunner on a B-17F named Snap, Crackle and Pop, miraculously survived a free fall from 20,000 feet. After his B-17 was hit during a daylight bombing mission of a German U-boat base in occupied France, Allen exited his ball turret and started to make his way to the bomb bay. But then tragedy struck. The B-17 exploded and Allen fell from the burning plane without a parachute. He fell on a glass roof at the railroad station in Saint-Nazaire, France. Although he was seriously injured, a German doctor managed to save his life. Allen lived a long life and passed away in 2003. The B-17G, Shoo 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 Baby, experienced one of the most epic journeys of all Second World War planes. While on a bombing mission in May 1944, it experienced an engine malfunction over German airspace. Even so, it managed to drop its bombs on target. The plane was unable to return to England and the crew diverted their course towards neutral Sweden and landed in Malmö. An agreement was made between the US and the Swedish government to release interned crew members, while Sweden was allowed to use several B-17s that landed on its territory. Shoo 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 Baby was soon sold to a Danish airline company, which used it until March 1948. After that, it was transferred to the Danish army, entering military service again. In 1952 and 1953, it was used for transport to Greenland and then finally retired. After lying abandoned for several years in France, in 1972, it was transferred back to the US and then went through a lengthy restoration process. The aircraft is now kept at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. In 1938, the B-17 prototype set a record for flying from the east to west coast of the US in just 13 hours and 27 minutes. The B-17 was at one time during the Second World War the highest produced plane, with around 3,600 planes produced every year. That's almost 10 planes every single day. And the most Medal of Honors received by crew members of any particular plane is, you guessed it, the B-17, with 17 Medals of Honor given to B-17 crew members.